There we go. Okay, great. Welcome, everybody. My name is Brian Morrison. You are joining us for Full Stack Chat, which is a show where we discuss, we interview other builders in the industry who are trying to create and market products, sometimes sprinkled in with some developer advocates from companies that create tools for developers to use. So thanks for joining. Today, I have Dan Cranney here, who is we originally invited in to join to talk about I think it's ProfileMe.dev, which is kind of how Dan and I
Yeah.
first came to be, or came to know each other. I used the service, kind of fell in love with it, and reached out to him, and then kind of we kind of been going back and forth ever since. And before we move on, my name is Brian Morrison again. I'm a developer educator at Clerk and all around full stack tinkerer. I love building and marketing things. I love making things and putting it out there for people to share. So with that, once again, Dan Cranney, developer advocate at We Are Developers and former teacher and indie hacker. Former teacher is interesting. I did not know that.
Yeah.
So yeah, why don't you tell the audience a little more about yourself?
Yeah, sure. So hello for a start. I'm Dan. Good to see you again, Brian, as well. And I'm glad that your recent move went well. So, yes, just to introduce myself, as I said on the description, really, I'm a former teacher. So I was a filmmaking teacher for just under 10 years. And my education was in filmmaking. It was traditional kind of what we would call media, if you like, media production. And I'd always been somebody who was I mean, I was actually playing in a band when I was like a teenager, and I was working for a record label. I'm jumping around here, but it does all come back together. I was in this band, and I was working as a graphic designer for the record label, and doing video production for my degree. And then when I came out of uni, I started working for a company that did they wanted me to manage the website, basically, which was about creating videos for the website, but also doing some of the code side of it. It was very surface level code. It was HTML, CSS, and like some jQuery and JavaScript that I would just steal from a website and didn't really understand. And then, fast forward to now, I've quit teaching. I'm a developer advocate at We Are Developers, and now I really like code. So yeah, it's been a bit of a weird journey, but a fun one.
Yeah, it's good. Those weird journeys are sometimes the best stories. And I mentioned to Dan in our little pre-show conversation what to expect, that sometimes we might go off the rails, and I think this is going to be one of those moments. So you went from filmmaking teacher to developer advocate. The education side of that makes sense. I've heard of other teachers going into kind of the developer advocacy realm, but filmmaking to code. How did that journey go? Like, how did you make the jump finally?
I think part of it was that I don't actually see that much of a difference, because I'd been, coming from sort of a music background, going back to when I was sort of 17, 18, like, I'd sort of done music production. So I'd been in what would look like a bit like a video editor, but it was just, working with music. So then when I did my education and I was then editing video, it was a natural transition. And then what I always liked was when I would go on different websites and I would see those little micro interactions, or sometimes more the things you would see on the AWWW awards, where it's these really quite imaginative and creative kind of websites where they're almost taking techniques from filmmaking. They're doing things like depth of field and blur, and on scroll it would have those effects kind of and animations playing. So I don't think I ever saw there being a massive difference. It was just one is done with a video editor and the other one has got some code in it. But then if you're somebody who uses software like After Effects, which is, kind of CGI, motion graphics, you use JavaScript in there. So I think I just saw the link, and I had always, like I said, done surface level website work. I'd done a lot of kind of reskinning of WordPress templates and, installing Joomla templates back in the day and Drupal and all things over the years, but I couldn't make anything custom. And so it was just about hitting that wall where I said, well, if I want to, create this plugin or add this functionality, then I need to be able to learn. At that point, I thought PHP, because I was using a lot of WordPress. But I don't know a line of PHP. So again, it didn't pan out in the way I expected. But yeah, I suppose that helps to just explain how, I kind of made that transition, and I needed to get out of teaching, man. It was tough. It was tough. I think I loved it, but there comes a point where you go, I need to follow my instincts and learn to code, or I'm never going to do it,
Yeah. It's interesting you approached that from the angle that you did. It seems, and I might be maybe making this assumption here, but you seem to have come into coding from more of a design and interactivity standpoint, or I guess starting point. Whereas I used to be in IT. I've always loved writing code and playing, automating things. But for me, it was always the automation, like writing things that would, complete steps within a business process. It just goes to show that like this field is for people of all different backgrounds who have all different passions, and it's kind of cool that code brings all these together. So
No, for sure. I think it is. I mean, just to add to that, really, just to say that, I think that I was always seeing people that were sort of, I mean, we'll get into the projects in a minute, but it does link to this, that I was always seeing things like, back-end developers or people that were working with like DevOps and things like this. And because I could never see their work, I didn't really understand how good they were at what they did. And I think for me, the design side has always sort of been more of an interest to me just in general, regardless of what we're talking about, cars or whatever. I like design. And for me, it was sort of, okay, well, once I started to learn to build things, I thought, well, maybe that's where my skill lies at the moment. Before I knew how to actually code, I could still make quite simple things look all right and look okay. And I thought, well, that's what I'll lean on. And then over time, I'll get better at actually writing code and making good features, and it seems to work out. Yeah, it seems to be going okay.
Awesome. Well, on the topic of making things look good, your service has made my GitHub profile, at least my first GitHub profile I've ever created, look fantastic. So that was the intro. I know we kind of teased that we're going to talk about a new project towards the tail end of this. But why don't you talk about ProfileMe.dev and kind of where the ideas came from, how you feel about it today? I know it's been out for a while, and you said you're moving on to something else. So let's just quickly touch on that and what it does and how you got started there.
Yeah, so the idea, I don't know why, but I remember exactly where I was. I was in a train station in Switzerland, and I think it's something about when you travel, you just get ideas. And I just happened to see, like a post on X of somebody saying, share your GitHub profiles. And I just clicked a few, and in the nicest way, I thought, okay, these are really experienced people, but they're quite ugly profiles, right? That sounds really harsh to say, but yeah, me included, me included. I mean, I'd say don't look at mine right now because I've been testing my new project and I think I've messed it up, but it's fine. So yeah, I just sort of thought, okay, this is a gap that I can fulfill. I wanted to make things specifically for developers. Partly it's I don't want to say the following, but the people that were following me on X were all developers. And I thought, well, what can I make that's out there that people could use and find useful and actually find useful, but maybe useful to just every developer, regardless of what background they come from, that idea of, DevOps, backend, front end, whatever. And I also wanted to really experiment more with open source. At that point, I hadn't done much apart from just contribute a few really tiny things to different projects. And I wanted to see what it was like to run and sort of manage my own, and see what I could do with that. And yeah, it sort of got a bit of traction, and then people like yourself used it. And I thought, okay, people are actually using this, and you hope they will, but you're not sure they're actually going to end up using it. So yeah, it means a lot when I hear people say things like what you've just said.
Yeah, that's great to hear. Okay, you've teased the new project. Let's talk about it. You've left in the notes here, myfolio.dev is the new project. So why don't you tell us a little bit about that and what direction that's going? It sounds, based on how you were talking about ProfileMe.dev, that this might be kind of a step up from that, some kind of iteration.
Yeah, I think again, with ProfileMe, I kind of hit a bit of a wall around, I think like I'd made a few projects that were just entirely free. And I think in the last sort of year or so, I've tried to focus a little bit more on products, not necessarily projects, which I know some people very cynically can say, so wait, that means you only want to make things that you're making money for. I would say to a degree, yeah. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think it's another side to being an indie builder that is important. And for me, was not the priority. I was not really concerned by profits or marketing, or even, it's just about making projects that people could find useful. So once I kind of hit that wall a little bit with ProfileMe, where I thought, I don't know if there's much more I really want to add, any kind of major functionality, I thought about whether there was something that could bring together a few of the different sites that I've built. So one of them is colorhub.app, and just to mention that, it's basically a store for a couple of hundred of different sort of pre-made color palettes that you can preview on a site. So if you take that feature of color palettes and then being able to preview them, and you put that together with ProfileMe, I thought that maybe what I could do was allow people to not just build their GitHub profile and design it and style it, but also do a portfolio page, and they could import projects from GitHub into their portfolio page. and also a resume page, which I'm going to be developing. I'm still sort of, that's the least developed feature at the moment, but it will be, you know, exportable as a PDF or just a standalone resume site that you can send people to, a kind of simplified one. And I plan on adding in LinkedIn to that as well, so that you can reverse engineer, whether it's that you build your profile in LinkedIn and then just import it everywhere else, or take it from MyFolio and then just boot that straight, export it straight with the API into your LinkedIn profile. So it's something, my hope for it is that in theory a developer could go to that site. I'm particularly targeting more so anyone who's not front end primarily, I suppose, is how I'm thinking of it. It's my reasoning is that a lot of front end developers, they enjoy designing it and building it, and why would they want a portfolio page that does that for them? But speaking to a lot of back end developers, where they say making it look nice is the hard part for me. That's my hope, is that they might find some benefits in it. And I'm really hoping with this project as well, I'm leaning a lot more into the marketing side and learning from the early users. So this is really the first time I've talked about it anywhere. I've got it on my profile page, but I just silently put the link there while I sort of figure out and fix a few minor details and get up the courage to launch on, you know, Micro Launch and Product Hunt and YouNeed and all the different launching sites. So yeah, it's definitely a step up from ProfileMe, and I'm hoping that I can produce something again that's going to be really useful and just make that whole process nice and easy, and not something that you need to spend days building to make a portfolio or a CV, you know, / resume.
Yeah, that sounds great. And I wanted to comment on something you mentioned there about, you know, people building projects to make money. I think it's important for a lot of I think there's a lot of developers out there who have gotten a tad spoiled with how many free things there are these days. Like, I mean, look at I see Neon, right? Like, that's just the one example that comes to mind because I've been talking to their team. Like 10 free databases, 10 free Postgres databases. Like that's an insane free tier, you know, and it just keeps growing more and more expansive. So on top of that, like people who make things, especially people like you and I, who like maybe don't have entire product teams who are marketing these like VC funded startups, like building things that generate revenue for us, that get us paid for all the hard work that we put into it. I don't feel like there's anything wrong with that. That's I mean, you know, selfishly throwing this out there, it was one of the reasons why I pitched you a few bucks for helping me out with my profile. I think I jumped into a Patreon or something you had. I was like, hey, here's some coffee money for, you know, to thank you for this project you put together. You know, and I do try and do that for other indie creators. If I come across something that, hey, you built something cool that's going to be useful, like don't just take advantage of it. Don't take advantage of the people who are building it. I think that makes an impact, right? So
I think we do. It's funny that you say that, because it was actually maybe 10 minutes before this call, I had a podcast playing, and they started the episode, and the first thing they said is, sorry to everybody who's complaining that we didn't have an episode last week. I guess 2-hour free episodes every week isn't enough for you. And you think that's 4 hours minimum of that person's week that they've given you for free. And okay, they might get some, you know, indirect income, but I think that's, and you know, like you're saying there, you might get indirect income through some of the GitHub sponsors and things like that. But you know, I've got a kid to feed, I've got bills to pay. I'm like everybody else. And you know, for me, it's about I kind of think of things in like 6 month to 12-month periods as well. In the first 6 months for me, or the first 6 months of like learning to code, were just that, like focus on learning, don't build anything. Then it was build things and learn from the process of building. And then the next 6 months was, okay, let's get a job with this. I've built these projects, I've put them out there, let's get a job. The next 6 months was, let's have a newborn daughter and keep my job, you know, like try and get your feet under the table. 6 months with a kid. And this next 6 months for me is now, okay, let's focus on building things quickly. We'll get to that in a minute though, because I think that's been a topic talked about a lot over the last couple of weeks with the ship fast controversy and things like this. But it's taught me a lot, and it's made me reflect on, you know, my whole process with building things and why I'm doing it. And profit has to be, for me, one of those things.
Yeah, and I think that's fair. Okay, yeah, we're gonna touch on that a little bit, I guess, a little more. But I wanted to talk. Let's bring it back to the tech side of things. So, what technologies are you using to build MyFolio, and what do you like about them? What do you not like about them? I don't know. Just tell me your experience about your stack, why you chose what you chose, and pros and cons.
Yeah, sure. And I might just add in one that I'm not actually using for my folio, but I have used this weekend, and I
Okay.
think it's going to become part of my stack. So Next.js at the core, so JavaScript ecosystem. In terms of the stack for my folio, it's the front end is obviously Next, and I'm running it with Supabase. So Supabase is going to handle all of the authentication, but it's also going to handle storing the data about the profiles and things like that. In terms of things that I like about them, I mean, I'm quite vocal about Supabase in that for me it was the thing that enabled me to see a way forward with backend. I just sort of I gotten to a point where I was like, okay, I feel semi comfortable with front end, and I was just looking at like, where do I go next? I think I found like a Reddit post or something of somebody saying, oh, try this Supabase, and it was just a link. I didn't know what it was. I clicked it, and by the end of that kind of weekend, and I know it's on their website, something like build in a weekend, but by the end of that weekend I could at least see how I was going to build an app. I did a couple of really basic API calls, and I could see how simple those queries were, and I thought, okay, I could actually have an authentication system, and I could have a database system without spending another 6 months or 12 months just focus on back end. So that's definitely at the heart of everything I would build in terms of having the auth in the back end. The other thing I've been using this weekend is Trigger.dev. They're not partners with Supabase, but I know that they sort of got each other on each other's docs, and I think they probably invest in each other and things like that because they work really well together. And it's just to handle background tasks, and I've been using it with Resend for sending emails and things like that. So between all of those things, Next, Supabase, and Trigger/Resend, I've got kind of everything in as few places as possible, because I try. For me, it feels unstable when I start spreading things too much, and I think that's why I say that Trigger and Supabase. Because I could have done things like that with AWS, and I just feel like then you're starting to reach into another ecosystem that Supabase and Trigger already work. So that does the job for me.
Yeah, it's amazing these days how we can build an entire startup, but which essentially a startup with just a couple of services. I mean, like
Yeah.
my stack that I'm using lately, which I've really grown to love, is Remix, Fly, Clerk, and Convex are kind of the four pieces that I put
Mm.
together. It's a really good combo. But like once you find that like combination that works really well, it's really hard to deviate from that unless something drastic happens. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah,
Especially when they
yeah,
build things for each other like that, when they've got like SDKs that kind of, and then in the docs when they mention the other technology, and you think, well, there's a reason these things are paired together.
yeah,
And it's the other thing I forgot to mention actually is Prisma. Prisma sits in there as well, and I really just use that for the ORM, and has made it so much more straightforward. Even though those Supabase queries are really readable, um, sometimes when you're doing something slightly more advanced, like you're wanting to get from one of the relational tables as well, Prisma just makes that way more straightforward. And
yeah,
so I'm a big fan of them as well. Yeah.
yeah. That's great. Okay, let's talk about some of the like rough things that you've run into. Now
Mm.
you might have a little bit of a leg up on this because you're kind of consolidating some of the previous projects and things that you've worked on in the past. Which, if you have that experience of solving an issue in a previous project, trying to do it a second time is significantly easier. But
Mm.
this is still a new project. This is still something you're trying to get off the ground, it sounds like. So what are some of those challenges you might have run into from when you had started that you didn't quite see coming?
Me. I think I'm the problem, Brian. I think
Okay.
that's the issue. And what I mean is, I think like everybody, you come up with a project idea, and then you go, oh, and I could do this, and I could do this, and then you start bouncing ideas. My wife is amazing, because not only will I give her an idea, but if it's not very good, she'll bounce it back, or she'll say, oh, yeah, it's not great, and that honesty. But then often will give me more ideas, and sometimes I have to say, let's not do this, because I'm not going to know when to stop. And maybe what we need to do is have this conversation later. So when I say I'm the issue, it's about being really disciplined in terms of what other features that I want in the MVP, and do not let that grow. And so I've really tried to focus on the process. Now, I've borrowed this from music, in that a friend of mine and myself, we would write some songs together, and we started to focus on how we write songs rather than the songs themselves. And we sort of not found a formula, but we definitely found certain ways that you can go, okay, this is a clear path. By the end of it, we will have a song. I'm trying to do the same thing when it comes to building these projects, that I'm really trying to focus on uh, how can I do something quickly and build enough features that people get excited about it, but then not let those features grow, but still build it in a way that I'm future proofing, and I am building the features in like a sensible way, and I'm not just hacking them as quickly as I can and then
Yeah.
building making a headache for myself later on.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes a whole lot of sense. It sounds like I'm going to borrow a term from a previous business role that I held, a standard operating procedure. Sounds like
Yeah,
you're
yeah.
crafting is like making this repeatable, defined process that you can use to like create and build things.
Yeah, definitely. And I don't think I necessarily want to take the creativity out of it, because I
Right.
know that and it's difficult because it's always that thing of, you could spend an entire weekend just looking at fonts and kidding yourself that you're being productive and saying, oh, but by the end of that weekend, I've decided which fonts I'm going to use. And for me, I think that you have got some instincts that you can train those instincts to be good or, to be good or bad, right? If you don't look at any design, you're never going to have good design instincts. Whereas if you just look around at other people's work and you say, what is the sort of styling that I want for this font? Then as soon as you find one that you think it works, go with it, change it later. And I think that's sort of what I'm trying to do, where I'm trying to listen to my instincts, use some technique on top of it, not just, I like that font if it doesn't suit the project. But then not let any of those decisions, especially design decisions, like slow me down. And I think if you listen to those instincts, and sometimes I use my own tools. I go to Color Hub and I know already there's, okay, that's a good one for kind of a business dashboard, because it's what I had in my head when I made the palette. And yeah, I definitely I don't want any friction points and things where I spend a weekend and by the end of it, all I've done is made a minor decision and lied to myself that I was actually achieving quite a lot.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. I got you. It's like how your fonts are not going to make a major impact on the value that people are going to get out of your service.
Designers are going to
And
hate to hear that, Brian. But it's
yeah,
true.
I know, but it's the reality, like
It's true.
ultimately at the end of the day, the things that what will get you and some kind of income out of your side projects is producing value for others, right? Like,
Yeah.
your profile me saved me a lot of time and effort having to go and figure out how I want to design my profile and what I wanted to include in it. Like if I remember, and it's been a little while since I used it, but it was basically like, okay, what languages you use? Okay, let's add some icons in there for those languages. Okay, well, like just some very
That's it.
basic information, and then just spit out a template at the end of the day. I mean,
Yeah.
that's valuable to me because otherwise I would have had to sit there and think about it. I mean, even tools like ChatGPT, like bringing that in. ChatGPT, like
Absolutely.
developers do everything that ChatGPT can do, most of them, right? And if you don't, honestly, word to junior devs out there, you should learn how to do everything that ChatGPT can teach you how to do, because that's going to future-proof your
Yeah.
job, at least for the near term. But
True.
it saves me. Sometimes I'll go in there and I'll ask it for a code snippet that does something because it saves me from having to think about it and write it, and it gives me an answer. And it's like I know enough to say like, yes, this is the right answer, or no, this is complete garbage. But that value that ChatGPT gives me is the reason why I use it. And like back to the original point, your selection of font on a website is not going to produce value for the
No, no,
user.
it's not. It's going to be a minor thing for most people. There are, there are obviously things that you can see, quite extreme examples, where somebody uses a font and you just think you're actually making this look quite cheap, rather than it
Yeah.
looking good. But those decisions have already been made by somebody else. I'm not saying go to somebody's site and steal it, but if you actually look around and you just even almost like inspect the source like you used to in the old days, but looking at which fonts are used on the other sites, most of the time it's not anything that's that groundbreaking. It's either a narrow font or a wide font, and that's about it. And there's probably a family, condensed versions and wide, but don't overthink it. And I think that would probably be my mantra a little bit in general for the last year, is just don't overthink it. And it's going to be my mantra going forward, because I do overthink stuff. I do overcook it. I come up with too many features, and that's when I have to
Yeah.
go. I'm almost thinking in terms of, like iterations, but major versions, and saying, buy this third version with all singing, all dancing. If this project hasn't gone anywhere by probably, the step before that, then I'm never going to get to that third step, because it would be so much time sunk into it and I would have wasted time. And in the past, I would have just built those features right at the start, wasted so much time, and then
Yeah.
found out that nobody wants it.
Yeah. And I know this is again getting a little bit off the rails here, but I would also encourage as I get older, and as I kind of like have been in this field for as long as I have, and I really enjoy what I do. I love tech, right? Like I used to be in IT. I used to drive around and fix people's computers. Even before that, I've done networking, I've done servers. Now I'm doing development. Now I'm doing education. So it's like, I really enjoy this field. There is a time and place for you to just kind of let your creativity juices flow. Like, sure, scrolling fonts on a weekend might be a waste of time, but if you like doing it, there's got to be that balance there of like,
True.
I mean, look at the flip side of this, and I'm not trying to push back on what you're saying, Dan, but you could
No,
sit
it's a
there
good
and
point.
scroll TikTok instead, right? Where it's like
Yeah, true.
scrolling fonts might be a little more productive than scrolling TikTok for 5 hours on a weekend. I don't know. Maybe I'm just making
Definitely.
excuses for myself.
It's a good point. It's a good point. And I think actually there is something to be said for, there's that thing of sort of only feeling productive when you're writing code rather than just reading it. And I think that that's totally not how I feel, right? I think that reading it is 50% of that kind of processing information, and it's the same sort of thing with it. If you are just sitting and scrolling fonts, I would say if you apply that knowledge in some way, if you go and download 5 different fonts and then you maybe try and design something in particular, like let's say an e-commerce site, and you try each of those 5 sites and then you pick which one you think is most suitable, show it to your friend and they say, yeah, you've chosen the right one. You've applied that knowledge and that's an upgrade in your skills, even though you might not feel like you've done much actively. So no, I do agree. I'm kind of arguing against myself, but I think it's just about that being really honest, isn't it? Because I can definitely kid myself and pretend I'm being so productive,
Oh,
or at
definitely.
least make myself feel like I am, when I'm not.
Yeah, for sure. I get that. All
Yeah.
right, we are coming up on time here. So one of the things I like to ask all of my guests is if you have any advice for new builders out there, people who are just trying to like kind of get their feet wet, maybe thinking about building some kind of product or SaaS, what's the 1 or 2 pieces of advice you'd give them?
Maybe the first one would be don't expect, if I build it, they will come. I think I and a lot of other people have to accept that marketing is a whole nother skill set that we probably don't want to do. If I had a choice, I would never market anything. I would just build things and then press publish, and then everybody starts using them, and we know how it goes. But yeah, accept that marketing is unavoidable, and you can build a good project and a product. The second thing, though, is I would say it depends what that, I'm kind of again arguing against myself. It really depends what you're building that project for, and don't put pressure on yourself if you are just building something for fun or a free product. There's always a reason that you're building it, whether it is just for yourself. And one thing that I don't think gets spoken about enough is building something and sharing it when it's not perfect, and it never will be. But even when it's very early on and you're sharing people ideas that you've got, that's so valuable for you getting it out of your system, and this feeling of when somebody writes a blog post, for example, pressing publish is the hardest thing the first time you do it. From that point on, it's easier. So my advice would be push things out there as regularly as you can, and don't think to yourself, is this perfect or is this good enough? Just think, I'm getting feedback, and that is more valuable than me feeling good that I've shared something that's perfect. So share your work.
Yeah, there's a fantastic book, which I'm not sure if you've read it, Dan. Show Your Work by Cleon. His last name is Cleon. I can't remember his first name. It's completely escaping
Okay.
me. But it's a relatively short, easy to follow book that's very artsy in nature. But it's fantastic, and it kind of is all about the topic of the benefits of working in public and sharing your work. And he takes it from, I think, more of like an artistic angle. But realistically, us being in the software development field, you find yourself a community, whether it's on Twitter, whether it's in a Discord, and just share what you're working on, because everybody who's in there, we're all people at the end of the day, right? And we're interested in the human side of things. And if you're building something cool, you never know who you're actually gonna resonate with.
Absolutely.
One of my videos that I put out on YouTube was built in an hour because I didn't know what I was going to do, and it's just an idea that came to me, and turns out it resonated with so many people. It kind of helped shape a little bit of the direction of my channel. So if you don't ever put the stuff out there, you're never going to know, for sure. So
And I just want to add to that. Actually, I know
yeah.
we're coming up on time, but just to add, there's another book that I find really, it's very short. Again, it's I think it's Stephen Pressfield, and it's the War of Art. So it's not the art of war; it's the War of Art. And same sort of thing. Again, I'm not an artist. I'm somebody who just likes being creative in different areas, but same sort of thing. They give you this this term called resistance, and it's anything that stops you being creative and or sharing your work, or just engaging in creativity in some way is resistance. And that can take a lot of different forms. You know, oh, I'm tired, that's resistance, or nobody's going to like it, that's resistance, or I'm just going to go and play PlayStation for 5 minutes. And if deep down you know that you're only doing those things because you don't really want to be vulnerable, and make something that you then have to share with people and just hope that they don't hate, then it's probably resistance.
Yeah, that's a good call out. I haven't read that book, but I think it's been on my list for a while now.
It's a good one.
So,
it is good. It's definitely worth it. Very short. It's about 30 odd pages, I think, but it's really short.
Very short.
It's brilliant though. It's very concise. There's sort of big word, big font. No, it is though. It's brief, but it gets straight to the point.
Yeah, they're leaning that into building products. Sometimes it's not the massive code base that provides the most value. Sometimes it's just the really straightforward thing that does one thing well. So, all right, Dan, where can people find you if they want to connect with you or see some of your work?
Yeah, so they can go and have a look at my website. I'm danielcranney.com. You can also follow me on X, and I've got a plan for my YouTube channel that I've started working on. Finally, you know, talking about procrastinating, I finally scripted loads of things that I'm going to produce, and I'm going to be starting with a load of shorts on different topics. So I'll be pushing those out I'm going to aim to have 30 ready and do one every day for a month. So that'll be coming. I'm going to aim for a couple of weeks' time.
That sounds super impressive, and I'm excited to see what kind of work you produce there. But if you're watching this after the fact, check the on YouTube specifically. Check the description to find links to everything we talked about today, including those 2 books. I'll find some links to toss those in the description as well. And with that, thank you so much for joining me, and thank you, Dan, for coming on board and chatting with the audience about your experience building stuff. And we'll catch you on the next one. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thanks again.